as the New South Wales government works through its own dilemmas, the Queensland government is in a world of political pain that reaches into the two top offices in the state. Not only is the Treasurer and Deputy Premier Jackie Trad facing calls to stand aside over the family purchase of a property likely to benefit from political decisions on her own desk, but the Premier's Chief of Staff is in the gun about a business he's been involved in on the side that's picked up a taxpayer grant worth over $260,000. Today, question time in the state parliament was a feisty affair, with the LNP opposition leader not taking a backward step. Have a listen.
The Premier said in 2017, "Let me make it absolutely clear, I guard my integrity most dearly." An integrity crisis has engulfed the Palaszczuk government with the Deputy Premier's Woolloongabba house purchase and the revelation that the Premier's chief political advisor part-owned a company that received a taxpayer-funded grant of $267,000. Will the Premier now restore integrity in her government and sack her Chief of Staff and sack her Deputy Premier?
Mr Speaker, I do guard my integrity and the integrity of this government at the highest order, Mr Speaker, and Queenslanders... Order! And Queenslanders know that.
I refer the Premier to her Director-General's decision to appoint Ernst & Young to audit the payment to her Chief of Staff. I can now reveal that the partner from Ernst & Young was on the expert panel for Advanced Queensland that advised on the establishment of the Business Development Fund at the time that the grant was paid. How can Ernst & Young audit this grant given the clear conflict of interest?
Now attacking accounting firms in this state, Mr Speaker. They attack public servants, attack accounting firms.
Has the Treasurer or her staff ever had a discussion with David Barbagallo about the Business Development Fund, which gave a taxpayer-funded grant of $267,500 to a company part-owned by David Barbagallo while he was the Premier's Chief of Staff?
I call the Deputy Premier.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Body language tells you everything there. Not many answers coming from the Premier and a lot of stonewalling coming from the Treasurer. Joining me now live for the latest in Queensland, LNP leader Deb Frecklington joins me now. Tell you what, Deb, very, very interesting. Did you get the answers you were after today?
Oh, look, absolutely not, Peter, and great to be on your show. What I would say is today what you saw is the arrogance of the Palaszczuk government on show. Look, the more we work out about this integrity crisis that is engulfing the Queensland government, just the worse it gets. There are so many different elements to the integrity crisis, and the reason why we are where we are is because Annastacia Palaszczuk is seriously the weakest Premier Queensland has ever seen. It's pretty astounding that Annastacia Palaszczuk is standing beside her Chief of Staff and standing beside her Deputy Premier. Look, both the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Premier needs to be stood aside or sacked. And yet we've got a weak Premier that's only given the people of Queensland a weak response in relation to this terrible situation that we've got about non-disclosures. We've got the Premier's political chief advisor getting almost $250,000 towards one one of his own companies. I mean, it's simply breathtaking.
Yeah, look,
We've got the Deputy Premier who...
Yeah, Deb, sorry to interrupt.
Well, Peter, you've been a Chief of Staff.
Yeah, let's just start with the Chief of Staff, because I don't understand why an accountancy firm is brought in to investigate something like this, which is a clear integrity issue, why this wasn't referred to senior independent panel, let's say, of public servants, or why this wasn't itself referred to the CCC. Why was Ernst & Young brought in, and now we hear that there's a connection of Ernst & Young to the granting of these monies in the first place. Now, surely that's grounds to start the whole process again. And indeed, why is this bloke in the office at the time? He should be stood aside while the investigation's underway.
Well, look, Peter, you've wrapped it up very well, and that's exactly why we used question time today to ask those questions. I mean, we need to remember that in Queensland we've got the Queensland Audit Office. They're an independent office. They could have investigated this. But yet we've got Annastacia Palaszczuk, who has actually employed a private consulting firm, one whom was involved in the granting of this grant at the time to the Premier's Chief of Staff, to actually tell her the difference between right or wrong. I mean, if Annastacia Palaszczuk can't see the integrity problems that are before her with her Chief of Staff, even forgetting about Jackie Trad for a minute, just looking at the integrity issues in her own office, then we've got a real problem around trust and the Queensland Premier.
Yeah, look, it stinks to high heaven. It stinks to high heaven when you have an audit office, they're not investigating. When you have a crime and corruption commission, they're not investigating. Where you have a so-called independent public service, they're not investigating. You have to go out and procure at great expense to the taxpayer somebody who's possibly going to give you the answer you want. I mean, that's what you can only read into this. We'll see what comes of it. But go back to Jackie Trad. I watched her body language closely in that footage there. She's petulant. She's fed up. She's not happy, and she's very much on the defensive. It's a standoff between these two leaders, isn't it? Because Palaszczuk can't sack her because of the power and the clout that Trad has, but Trad knows that she's in a very difficult situation, in particular because, compounding the original failure to disclose, she picked up the phone and called the independent umpire that is going to investigate matters like this, which seems to me an extraordinary breach.
Yeah, look, it is absolutely extraordinary. So what we have here is a really arrogant Deputy Premier who knows that she is the most powerful politician on display in the Queensland Labor Party, and the fact that Annastacia Palaszczuk is unable to use or show some leadership and sack her Deputy Premier is really there for everyone to see. Look, Jackie Trad was frustrated in the Parliament today, but that's because she knows that she is wrong. Surely, you saw her body language. She was unable to answer the questions. She tried to stonewall any questions that we put to her. I mean, this is a Deputy Premier that is in trouble. The Premier is in trouble. The Premier needs to actually show some leadership, use a backbone and stand aside the Deputy Premier. I mean, this is for the best interests of the people of Queensland. I keep saying this, you know, I'm out and about all the time, Peter, listening to people, and this is what people are talking about. Jackie Trad is making a laughing stock of the Queensland government, and Annastacia Palaszczuk is just so extraordinarily weak, and she is showcasing in the Parliament today how she actually has no power. She's got no power to do anything about her Chief of Staff, but she certainly doesn't have the power to do anything about the all-powerful left faction leader in Jackie Trad.
All right, well, where to now for the opposition? What can you do to put some integrity back into politics in Queensland?
Well, look, Peter, we're going to keep the pressure up on Annastacia Palaszczuk. This cannot continue to go on. The people of Queensland are demanding Jackie Trad stand aside. The people of Queensland are demanding that Annastacia Palaszczuk shows some leadership. And as the state opposition, that's what we're going to continue to do. We need to give confidence back to the people of Queensland. And this is what the Palaszczuk government is certainly not doing. And they're sick to death of Labor politicians using their position to line their pockets. I mean, this goes further. We've got the Employment Minister, Shannon Fentiman, who actually went off on a ski holiday, stayed in some accommodation by another government consultant who gets money from the Palaszczuk government, and the Employment Minister decided not even to declare it. I mean, this is the same place that the Treasurer stayed at, a luxury ski resort. Look, I just believe the people of Queensland deserve to have a bit of confidence and integrity back in their politicians, but unfortunately under Annastacia Palaszczuk and Jackie Trad, they're certainly not getting it. So, look, we're going to continue to hold this government to account. I'm not going to let up.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Deb Frecklington. I can see that you're a dog with a bone on this issue. We'll watch it closely, and of course the Premier's welcome on my show any day of the week to try and explain all of this away. Anyway, thank you very much for your time tonight.